Okay, well, I have 10 o'clock and that's the scheduled time to start, so I'll go ahead and get started. If you noticed, we will be recording the meeting. And that's just in case anyone wants to look at something again. If there's somebody that it couldn't be here that really wants the information, we will be recording the meeting. So my name's Dan Lima. I'm the OSU Extension Ag and Natural Resources Educator in Belmont County. And I'm one of the co-hosts for the Ohio State Extension Energy Outreach Group. Gwen Stewart's my counterpart for this group. Gwen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gwen Stewart. I work for Ohio State Extension and Community Development in Noble County in the southeast corner.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. So Gwen and I, and along with the Extension Energy Group, we were always discussing and we're always getting updates on energy progress in the state. And one of the things that we identified as an issue that would go a long way with local government across the state of Ohio is to make sure that they're aware of all the updates that happened in the past few years. So what we did was we talked it over and we figured out the two major areas that we wanted to explore were solar updates and traditional oil and gas updates. Maybe some are going to be more prevalent in your county than other programs, but what we did was we went ahead and separated the days. So today we're going to talk about solar. And the way it's going to be set up is we have a panel of 4 people. We have Mark Bruce from ODNR. We have Eric Romick, Peggy Hall, both from OSU Extension, and we have Dale Arnold from Farm Bureau. We're going to go ahead and give their bios. We're going to give them a few minutes to give updates on specific themes. So we're going to start with orphan wells, which is a little bit outside of solar, but very relevant, and all the counties that are with us today. We're going to talk about taxes. We're going to talk about Senate Bill 52 and House Bill 450. And then at the end of the short presentations, what we would like you to do is in the chat box, if you have a question for the panel, just go ahead and put your name and the county you're from. And what we'll do is we'll call you out in that order, and you'll have a chance to ask any questions relevant to your county, maybe make something a little bit more clear, but we'll take questions at the end. So if any questions from anyone here? Okay, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and read the bios, Gwen. So I'll do the first 2 and you'll do the last 2, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So one of our panelists today is going to be Mark Bruce from ODNR. Mark Bruce is an administrative officer at the ODNR Division of Oil and Gas. He manages the public information and information management sections and coordinates rulemaking efforts for the division. He's worked at the Ohio Department of Agriculture, Ohio Oil and Gas Energy Education Program, and is a former TV anchor. So Mark is going to talk about the orphan well program. Next after Mark will be Eric Romick from Ohio State Extension. And let's see, let me get Eric's bio here. Okay. All right. Eric Romick is an Ohio State University Extension field specialist for energy education, serving as a statewide education field specialist since 2012. He works closely with private, public, and university partners to conduct research, develop extension programs, and teaching community throughout the state. Romick's energy programs focuses on identifying best practices for energy management strategies and agriculture to enhance overall environmental and economic conditions in Ohio communities. All right, Gwen, do you want to do the other 2 bios?
Sure, and I have Peggy Halls. Peggy's an associate professor in agriculture and resource law at the Ohio State University, where she directs the OSU Extension's agricultural and resource law program, teaches agribusiness law in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at OSU, and is a research partner with the National Agricultural Law Center. Hall is a past president and board member of the American Agricultural Law Association and has received the association's Distinguished Service Award and Excellence in Agricultural Law. She holds a BS and an MS degree in Natural Resource Policy from Ohio State University and a law degree from the University of Wyoming College of Law, where she served on the Land and Water Law Review. We're also pleased to have with us today Dale Arnold from Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. He is the Director of Energy, Utility, and Local Government Policy, and over the past 3 decades has managed education, outreach, and technical assistance projects addressing energy generation, transmission, and distribution issues. These efforts include power siting, pipeline and transmission line easements, wind and solar energy, utility interconnection, and smart grid projects. Dale works with utilities, energy service providers, regulators, local government officials, and community organizations to best determine if and how projects should be considered in a community. He works with Farm Bureau leaders to create effective energy policy on the local, state, and national level, and has authored papers advocating a diversified energy portfolio using domestic oil and coal resources, nuclear, and renewable technologies. Dale is a native of Knox County, where his family can trace their involvement in Ohio agriculture starting in the 1820s.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. So what we're going to do now is short 10 to 15-minute presentations from each panelist. And again, if you have a question, just put your name and the county you're from on the chat, and we'll get to them at the very end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and start with Mark Bruce. Mark, can you go ahead and share your screen? All right, we can see it. And
there we go. Now I'm unmuted.
Okay, all right, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and turn it to you. And thank you for joining the panel.
Absolutely. So just letting everyone know, obviously the next session is focused a lot on oil and gas, but the reason we want to talk about orphan wells today is because orphan wells are located pretty much most of the state, a good 2/3 of it. So folks who might not have joined next week, we want to make you aware of this. Also, because we've actually got several calls at the division from proposed solar developers or public entities that would like to do something, but they go on our publicly available, our well locator, our resources we have, and they see a pink dot and they ask, what is that question? What is that? What does that mean? So we wanted to just take a second to talk about orphan wells and what the state is doing in response and how that might matter to you. So really, the first thing to hit home is that about more than 300,000 oil and gas wells have been drilled in Ohio since the end of the Civil War, really kind of when oil drilling started. It took off in the late 1800s in Northwest Ohio, Lima, Findlay, all the way down to Grand Lake, St. Mary's, that area. So there's been a lot of oil and gas development in Ohio. The Division of Oil and Gas wasn't created until here, 1965. So there are hundreds of thousands of wells that were drilled when there was no regulatory framework. Those are most likely the orphan wells today that we are working to take care of as a division. So currently, there are 1,000 orphan wells that meet the definition of an orphan well in Ohio law. Those are the ones that are in our program. We've identified about 20,000 just through record search that we are referring to as documented orphan wells. We've got some further investigation to do. This map gives you an idea of where these might be. As you can see, we hit nearly every county in the state with a documented orphan well. So this is something that truly is a matter of statewide interest. And it's something that the department, thanks to resources that have been made available from both the federal and the state level, are well equipped to tackle and to work to solve. So this is just kind of the growth that we've experienced in the last few years. As you can see, we were averaging anywhere from 10 to 20 wells a year being bid out and then plugged. Last year, we bid out 200. Fiscal year 2021 is the last full year of data. We bid out 200 wells and 181 of them were plugged. So we have grown exponentially as a program in the last few years, and the number of wells that are actually getting bid out and getting plugged. So that growth is positive, and that is also indicative of what is happening in communities like yours all across the state. So what's kind of next? The federal infrastructure bill made almost $5 billion available for orphan well plugging. These are the amounts that were identified as potential for across the country. This is what Ohio's going to get. And we got our $25 million award I don't know if the money's in hand, but it was awarded here just recently. And then we see what we have potentially down the road, another 230 million that could be coming, and another 70 after that, just from the federal government. The state program is already well funded because of a certain portion of the severance tax that is collected is set aside for orphan well plugging. The legislature has already made those changes, and so we're required to spend a certain amount of money to go ahead and plug orphan wells through state funds as well. So when you put the two together, we have about $22 million a year in state funding. We have estimated could be 326 million available from the federal government. So we're talking about more than $500 million available to plug orphan wells. We have the potential to be one of the top 2 states when it comes to funding in the country. So there's a lot of resources available. So what does that mean? We're going to talk more about this at the next panel, just a little bit, maybe a tease is what we could call this. We hope you join us the next time to get into more in depth. But what we wanted folks to know is we have resources available on our website, oilandgas.ohiodnr.gov. There are maps. There are lots of information about orphan wells there. What's important for you and your communities and the people that live in your communities is they can go to our website and they can report an orphan well there. So if they have a well that they think might be an orphan well, or they just don't know, you can go online and report it to us, and we can do an investigation, and we can start to see what is exactly going on. Is it a production well that isn't being cared for by an operator, or is it truly an orphan well? You know, those are the things that we can start to find out here. And so that was, I don't want to take too much time because obviously the focus of today is on solar, but the reason to bring it in is, as I said, we've had several solar operators who have reached out and said, hey, we want to, take 200 acres to put panels on it. What are these? What are these dots? What does this mean? Is there a way to get it plugged? Do you do it? Can we do it? Can the solar company hire a contractor to come and plug wells? Absolutely, that can happen too. So I think the point here is this is something that could be in play no matter where you are in Ohio, not just on the eastern side of the state. So that's why we wouldn't just take a moment today to kind of just lay this out there that orphan wells are a thing. We recently completed a public information campaign. Hopefully you heard or saw some PSAs on your radio or television station, kind of just explaining that these are a thing out there and we want you to be aware of them as Ohioans. And if you have questions, let us know. So short and simple for me. I'll hang around to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with our next speaker today, Eric Romick from Ohio State Extension. He's going to be talking about taxes in regards to solar. So Eric, can you go ahead and share your screen with us?
Hey, Eric, just before you get started, Dan, I wanted to just note that we have our Ohio State Extension Assistant Dean and Associate Chair, Greg Davis, on the line with us today, and happy to have him. This is a program of Ohio State Extension, and I did also drop in the chat a link to our Extension Energy website, energizeohio.osu.edu, where you will find a lot of Peggy and Eric Romick's work, as well as a variety of information about the Extension Energy team.
Thank you, Gwen. All right, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Can you see my screen slides good, Dan?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. As Dan mentioned, my name's Eric Romick, and I'm an Ohio State University Extension Field Specialist for Energy Education. So I work statewide on energy issues, everything related to oil and gas, to wind up in Northwest Ohio. We do a lot of on-farm energy efficiency and on-farm management programming and research, and then of course today's topic, which is utility scale solar. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I've been working with farmers and local government on utility scale solar projects in one fashion or another, dating back to 2008, when I was working with the Wyandotte County Commissioners on a 12 megawatt project in Wyandotte County that was surrounding the county airport. And so, I think back to the early days when we were working on that project, and I never would have dreamt that we would be talking about solar at the scale we are today, where You look at the power siting board, and there's 50 projects that are currently under review and at some status or another, including more than 91,000 acres statewide. So the topic has really ballooned to the scale that I never really thought we'd be looking at and considering. And there's obviously a lot of perspectives and potential impacts that come with that. You can look at it from private landowner rights in terms of leasing and leasing best practices. You can look at it from a land use issue when you start to think about solar energy as a technology with an inherently low power density that just simply takes a lot of horizontal surface area to generate a little bit of power. You can look at it from the community impacts, whether it's neighbors that all of a sudden have visual impacts or concerns over health and public safety, or whether you look at it from a taxation standpoint. So you see the community impacts from these projects as it relates to tax revenue. And that's what Dan and Gwen had asked me to talk about this morning. Is I was asked to share 4 or 5 slides that would summarize the payment in lieu of tax program for utility scale solar projects in Ohio. So with that said, I think before we jump into the details of the exemption program, it's important to spend a few minutes reviewing the taxes that we're actually exempting. So I'd like to jump into my slides here, and we'll start out with some animations and kind of hopefully set the stage for utility scale solar taxation in Ohio. So again, to understand the taxation of utility scale projects, I think we really need to start with the tangible personal property tax program here in Ohio. So although tangible personal property taxes that were imposed on general business properties were repealed in place of the CAT tax, it's important to note that tangible personal property for public utilities, such as energy companies, still remain here in Ohio. As with many laws, there's a lot of kind of connecting the dots to understand the definitions, but Ohio law defines an energy company as a person in the business of generating or transmitting electricity from an energy facility that has an aggregate nameplate capacity greater than 250 kW or kilowatts. And just for some perspective, a 250 kW project is one that you might see on a business or mid-sized farm. So not necessarily a large project. Now, an energy facility is defined as one or more interconnected wind turbines, panels, or other tangible property that's used to generate electricity from an energy resource. So as we start to kind of connect these definitions together, solar projects generally fall within the definition of an energy company as it's classified for tax purposes here in Ohio. So under the public tangible utility personal property tax, there's 2 components. The first is the personal property tax aspect of this. So projects will be taxed on personal property assessed at 24% of the true value for generation equipment. So this would be equipment like the solar panels themselves. And then assessed at 85% of the true value on energy conversion equipment, which includes like distribution, transmission equipment. On the real estate side, under this program, any real property that's composed in the project's also exposed to taxation. So that kind of gives you a summary of what the baseline is. So when we think about energy or utility taxes in Ohio, this is kind of where it starts. So the question then is, what is Senate Bill 232 and what does this do? Ohio Senate Bill 232 is the Qualified Energy Project Tax Exemption Program. And there's a lot of tongue twisters with these tax programs, but SB 232 essentially exempts qualified energy projects from both personal and real property taxes, and instead imposes kind of one standardized payment in lieu of taxes. Before we get into the details of how Senate Bill 232 impacts some of our larger utility scale projects, I want to kind of set the stage for some of the other pieces that go with that. So under SB 232, there is a portion of that law that addresses small projects. So projects under 250 kW are automatically exempt. So when we think about these smaller systems that are interconnecting to the grid, most of these projects would be ones that would be net metered. So they're installed behind the customer's meter and used for local consumption at their place of business or at their farm. Those projects under 250 kW, they're automatically exempt under Senate Bill 232. And when we say automatically exempt, if you could follow my cursor as I track along the page, they're exempt from this public tangible utility personal property tax program. So their personal and real property taxes are exempt under this program. When we think about larger projects, so what about projects that are over that 250 kW threshold? A couple things to note. So they're not automatically exempt. In order for these projects to qualify, they must apply to the Ohio Department of Development, and they need to meet a set of standards and criteria to be considered. You'll see the term qualified energy project. So to meet that designation, and we'll look at some of that criteria on the next slide. But in addition to this, if it's a large project that is not only greater than 250 kW or kilowatts, projects that are greater than 20 megawatts also require county commissioner approval. So if they're deemed by the Ohio Department of Development as a qualified energy facility and they're greater than 20 megawatts, that application goes from the Department of Development or from the state and is then processed and forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners, where they will review the project and make a designation to either a resolution to either approve or deny that. It's important to note, because sometimes I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding when you start to look at all the moving pieces with the development of a solar project. So just a real quick, I guess, comment for just this workshop as a whole. Make sure that we are considering these in the steps that they are. So interconnection approval is, especially for utility scale projects going on transmission level, interconnection approval starts at the regional transmission operator. So for Ohio, that would be PJM. So that is the approval to interconnect a generator into the transmission system. That's very different from the Power Siting Board approval process, which is essentially the approval to construct and operate these facilities in Ohio. And then, what we're talking about today is taxation, very separate. So a county could review and deny a request to have an exemption under this Senate Bill 232 program. Just because they would deny that request doesn't mean, if the project has an interconnection agreement with PJM and is approved by the Power Siting Board, they could still proceed and build the project. They would just fall under this tax liability of the public utility tangible personal property tax. So just want to try and make sure that we have some clarity on that. As I do a lot of programming around the state, it seems like there's some misunderstanding there, that the processes are kind of intermingled in some way. So moving forward, I just want to spend a couple of slides looking at some of the details of this Senate Bill 232. So under the Senate Bill 232 program, the qualified energy projects are exempt from public utility tangible personal property tax, both personally and real, and instead pay a annual per megawatt based payment in lieu of taxes, or often referred to as a pilot payment. This pilot payment is based on the facility's total nameplate capacity. And that's an important note, because we're basing this payment on the system's nameplate capacities. So think of size, right? So maximum generation potential. And the thing to note with that is because it's based on nameplate capacity, it's predictable. It's not something that changes over time. While the actual output of utility scale solar system will degrade over time, anything exposed to the sun year over year, it's going to have a little less output. Because this is based on nameplate capacity, it's going to remain consistent over time. Revised code section 5727.75 also outlines the requirements for these facilities to comply with in order to acquire and keep their designation. So you kind of look at the bullet points on the right hand of that slide. This is what's required of the state to get designated as we think about a qualified energy facility. All right, so let's get to the money. So how much money are we talking about under this program? For qualified solar projects, there's kind of two components to the pilot payment. So first is what's referred to as the mandatory base payment or base portion of that pilot fee. For solar, it's very simple. It's set at $7,000 per megawatt annually. As you can see, for other renewable energy projects, there's kind of a sliding scale that's based on the amount of Ohio labor and or components that go into it. But for solar, it's fixed $7,000 per megawatt annually for the mandatory base portion. So in addition to that, county commissioners may negotiate an additional what's referred to as a service payment. The service payment cannot exceed $9,000 per megawatt when combined with the base. So very simple translation, you can add a service fee not to exceed $2,000 per megawatt for solar projects. So what's with separating these out? Why do we have a base and why do we have a service payment? And the importance of that is the flow of the funds, the distribution of the funds. So for the mandatory base pilot payment and the service fees, they go to different places. The base payments are distributed just as your tangible personal property taxes would be. So they're allocated to your local governments and school districts. Whereas the additional service payments that are negotiated, they get deposited directly into the county's general fund. So very important designation in terms of where those dollars flow. All right, so as we wrap up, I want to kind of give a little bit of an example or a comparison between the two, and it's as it's sourced there. You can see the chart source. This is data from a County Commissioners Association of Ohio report that put together kind of a hypothetical scenario that allows us to kind of compare side by side the payment in lieu of tax income versus kind of your traditional utility tax revenue. And I think that this is really important because oftentimes when we hear the word exemption, we get real scared, right? So, oh, well, you know, they're exempting the taxes for that utility. And it's important to understand the difference, right? And so in this case, what does it mean? What are we losing by exempting these? Well, we're exempting them and putting in place a payment in lieu of taxes. So this is a hypothetical scenario. And again, comparing these over a 30-year timeline. And what we're looking at is a modeled 150 megawatt project that would set on 900 acres. A couple of other key modeling assumptions that to help frame up the situation. In this scenario, we assumed that the county negotiated the full $2,000 service payment. So the payment in lieu of taxes was $9,000 per megawatt annually, which equals out to $1.35 million annually. You can kind of see. The other assumption is that the equipment was valued at $1 million per megawatt, again, on a 150 megawatt project. And it consisted of roughly 90% production equipment and 10% transmission equipment. And again, that is important because of the assessed value, 25 or 24% for equipment, 85% for transmission and distribution infrastructure. So as you can see, in the early years, you're getting a little bit more revenue from the tangible personal property tax program. So that's illustrated in pink, where you can see our annual revenue is higher than what we would have in the green line, which is our pilot payment. But in year 13, and again, because the pilot payment is very predictable, it's based on nameplate capacity, it's fixed every year. You're seeing that in year 13, we start to get more income annually from the pilot payment versus the traditional tax revenue through both personal and real property. If you add those up over the 30 years of the project, we get a total of $40.5 million from the pilot program. You can see here in green. That's roughly $4.3 million more than what we would have received from the traditional personal and real property income under that utility tax program, which came at $36.2 million. So again, I think that there's a certain amount of value to place on something that's predictable and fixed, whereas as you look at the traditional tax-based program, it fluctuates over time. And I think thus maybe exposes a little bit more risk over that 30-year lifespan. But both programs obviously generate significant local revenue from these types of development. So with that, I'd just like to kind of share a slide for some additional resources. I think it's really important to fully understand what the potential could be from these projects as they are, you're considering the future of development in your county. For additional resources on the program, I'd really direct you to the Ohio Department of Development's webpage for the Qualified Energy Tax Exemption Program. And in addition, I have John Workman's contact information there. John's the tax incentive manager. He's in charge of this program. Super helpful gentleman. You have his email and his phone number there as well. So if you have additional or specific questions related to projects in your county, I certainly recommend shooting John an email. With that, Dan, I'll kind of wrap up with our contact information, and I guess hand it back over to you. I'm not sure if we're holding questions here till the end.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Yeah, what we will do is we're going to go through all the speakers in the panel, and then I asked everyone to put their name and county on the chat, and we will get to those questions in order. So next is, thank you, Eric, for your presentation, and please stand by till the end, and we'll get to the questions. Next, our speaker will be Peggy Hall from Ohio State Extension. I think, Peggy, you already have your presentation up.
I do. Okay.
All right, thank you for joining us.
And I have my video on right now, Dan, but if my internet gets glitchy, would you let me know and I'll turn that off? Do I sound okay right now?
Yeah, you're coming in loud and clear, so
Good. All
no
right,
problems
good.
here.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you to Eric for that explanation on taxes. I always shudder a little bit on trying to explain taxes, but he does such a great job of simplifying that and helping us see how those laws apply to that taxation issue. I want to turn now and talk about the citing issue, because that's been such a controversial issue here across Ohio. It's one that I think put many of our local government leaders in a very difficult situation with people lined up on both sides of the issue of whether they want these large facilities in their communities or not. And so that led to Senate Bill 52. Now, traditionally under Ohio law, public utilities are exempt from local zoning authority by counties and townships. And so the frustration being heard at the State House was that local leaders had no authority or actually very little information about these large developments until they were there and being proposed and had applied for a certificate in front of the Power Siting Board. And so that changed with Senate Bill 52, and we're coming up on a year now of it being effective. It was effective last October, and it gave some authority to our counties and a little bit less to the townships to address the siting of these large facilities, to be involved in the review of those facilities. And also the law created decommissioning and bonding requirements, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. I want to focus more on the siting because that's where the controversy lies. Now remember, this bill applies only to those projects, both solar and wind, that are 50 megawatts or more and that have that single interconnection to the grid that Eric mentioned, that PJM connection. That's who we're targeting here, those larger facilities. And I've been getting the question, I'm sure everyone has been getting that and asking and getting that question, what if it's less than 50 megawatts? And the answer to that, I believe, is we'd have to decide whether it's a public utility, because if it is a public utility, then it would still fall under that public utility exemption from county or township zoning. And so I think many of you out there are probably worried that projects will start coming in under that number and that may change your ability to be involved in those projects. But again, it depends if it's a public utility, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We do have provisions in Senate Bill 52 that allow certain applications to be exempt if they were already in process. And you can see here on the, there it goes. On the the Power Siting Board's public website, there is a list that they keep very well updated on which facilities, where they are in the process as they come through to the Power Siting Board. And you can see that they've noted here which ones are grandfathered, meaning that they're not subject to Senate Bill 52. They're exempt from those new provisions. And that's because they were already so far along that they did not want to impose these new requirements on them. And then you can see also down toward the bottom of that list, facilities that are exempt from part of Senate Bill 52. The part that they're not exempt from would be to have county and township members on the committee that reviews their applications. So that list is on the Power Siting Board's website. Very helpful if you want to take a look. A lot of good data and maps there on the Power Siting Board's website. So getting into what the restricted area designation is in Senate Bill 52, this is the first part that gives authority to our county commissioners to designate areas in the county as restricted from solar or wind development. And those processes are laid out very well in the law. And you can see here that I've put it in kind of a timeline chart form here for you, but it's basically giving a notice to your county members, your county residents, that we're going to have a meeting to discuss this. We want to restrict areas or we're considering restricting areas in the county from this type of development. So you have to give a public notice in the county newspaper. You must post a map if you have already designated or are considering those boundaries for proposed restricted areas. And then you present that to county residents. And we've seen a number of counties do this and have quite a few people show up for these public hearings to make statements. That's just as we would run any other public hearing. And so there could be a resolution that comes out of that by the commissioners to adopt a restricted area. Some have proposed the entire county being restricted. Some have looked at certain areas. There are actually no standards or criteria in the law that says what factors you must examine in order to designate a restricted area. So it's wide open and up to the county commissioners to designate those restricted areas. We've had quite a few counties now who are turning around and asking their townships, are there areas you want to restrict in your township? And then they'll consider that in that county restricted area process. So if they do designate restricted areas, that will become effective in 30 days. And that means that there will not be an application that can move forward within the boundaries of a restricted area. The Power Siting Board has no authority to hear an application if a developer tries to propose something within the restricted area. And remember, this applies for both solar and wind. But that decision to designate a restricted area is subject to referendum. That's another new provision of the law. And that allows citizens to present a petition within 30 days, a valid petition. And if it is deemed valid, then it would go to a public vote. And the restricted area designation would not be effective unless the county voters approve that designation. And we do have now up in Crawford County, a restricted area designation that will be on the ballot in regards to wind development and the county commissioner's decision to establish restricted areas in the county from wind development. So that's the first big part of Senate Bill 52. The second part is to give more county and township involvement in a review of projects as they come forward. As I said before, we were hearing from many counties that felt that they were the last ones sometimes to know about this project. Well, Senate Bill 52 changes that and requires early information be provided from the developer to the county before that project is applied for down at the Power Siting Board. So there's a local meeting requirement that the developers must hold. There's the ability for the county then after that meeting to take action. If they don't take action and it does move forward, there's information that must be submitted from the Power Siting Board back to the county, notifying them that the application is complete and moving forward. And then there is part 4 there, county and township representation in the review of an application, all new provisions that give that local government a greater say and awareness of what's happening with that project. As far as that first local meeting requirement, you can see that before they can submit an application for a certificate to the Power Siting Board, a developer must hold a meeting in the county or counties where that facility would be located. And it's a public meeting. It has to be held at least 90 days, but not more than 120 days before applying for that certificate. They must give those commissioners and trustees where that facility would be located a 14-day notice that they are ready to hold their public meeting. And they must submit information about that facility to the counties and make that available for the public hearing. So that is specific in the statute about what they must submit, the type of facility that it will be, the nameplate capacity, and where it would be located. All has to be submitted, and then the public hearing would be held. Now, after the public hearing is held, and remember, everyone's invited to that, not just the county officials or township officials, but any residents. It's a public meeting. Anyone can attend that. Well, within 90 days of that meeting, the commissioners have a window of opportunity where they can adopt a resolution to either prohibit that facility from locating in the county, even if it's not in a restricted area. If there are no restricted areas, this is a separate authority that says we simply don't want it. Or they can limit its geographic boundaries, downsize it, change it a little bit. So a lot of authority at that point to say yes or no, basically, to that facility. So if they don't prohibit it, then the developer may move forward and submit that application to the Ohio Power Siting Board. If they do submit their application, it has to be exactly the same information. The developer can't change that information somewhere between the time that they had that public hearing and the application that is submitted to the Power Siting Board. But if the commissioners prohibit it, then again, there's strong language saying the Ohio Power Siting Board shall not approve an application regarding that facility. Now that decision, there is not a referendum provision built into Senate Bill 52 on the county commissioner's decision at this point to prohibit an individual facility. So that's a lot of information that I've thrown at you. And I know it's a little bit hard to understand the differences. Eric and I have been working on sorting out this 50 megawatt line and the Power Siting Board and the PUCO and what projects are going where and what projects our local governments do have, our counties and townships do have authority over. And so I've recently written a blog post, if you want to read a little bit more about this, that explains those laws that apply to renewable energy facilities in regards to siting within a county or township. And that's available now on the Ag Law blog on farmoffice.osu.edu. We have a number of other other resources that are available there. Eric mentioned those. He and I have written several law bulletins that explain Senate Bill 52. And if you want to know a little bit more about the decommissioning provisions that are in there that I didn't discuss here today, we have a bulletin and a video that explains those. They're really strengthened, those new provisions in Senate Bill 52 for decommissioning that facility at the end of its life. But you can find all of those resources on our website at farmoffice.osu.edu or over on the go.osu.edu/farmenergy website as well. And there's my contact information. And with that, Dan, I will turn back over to you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Our last presentation is Dale Arnold. So again, if you just joined us or you're not sure how this is working, start thinking about questions you want to ask any of the panelists that presented today. Make sure you put your name and county on the chat box. And as soon as Dale is done with his presentation, we will get to those. So Dale, I have you speaking on House Bill 450 and the public hearing process.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And Dan, do you have my slides up okay?
I will get to those right now. Let's see.
Yeah. I need to apologize because utility development's going on all over the state. And Dan has been wonderful because very recently we're having our gas lines in our community all being redone. And they sliced through the phone lines. And consequently, I'm here cellular. But Dan has my presentation. So we'll wait and get that up. So Dan, when you're ready to go, let me know.
Can you, okay. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing. Are you seeing the presentation or the presenter's view or the slideshow?
We're not seeing anything yet.
Are you not seeing anything? Okay, give me a second here. Sorry about the. Oh, okay. Oh, I haven't started sharing my screen yet, I guess. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, hold on a second. Let me pull it up now and.
We're all set.
All right, give me one. Let me set up here. Okay. Okay, so is it the now you're seeing the presentation?
We are, but you'll have to say it's on your PowerPoint, but you'll have to basically just start the presentation.
Okay. No. Shoot. I am having some difficulties here. I apologize. Okay, so what are you guys seeing?
I can see the slide deck. I tell you this, Dan, to make it easy for you. Oh,
Okay, let me just, I'm gonna do this. All right, is that better?
you just started screen sharing. We'll see here in a second.
For some reason it's not.
Dan, you still with me?
I think we lost Dan. Maybe you should just start talking and we'll see if we can, I'll see if I can find your slides for you as well.
Okay,
But if you want to go ahead and begin.
thanks. Well, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. It's interesting that I'd say my name is Dale Arnold. I'm with the Ohio Farm Bureau. Been with the Ohio Farm Bureau for about 37 years, 29 in the position I'm at right now. I really appreciate the comments and things basically that Mr. Bruce has had with regard to orphan wells we're involved in, as well as Eric and as well as Peggy Kirk Hall with regard to theirs. And it's interesting because what we are seeing is a number of things all happening simultaneously. On my first slide, I show basically what is called energy and transition. And I would like you to think about this. Over the last 30 years. And I tell you, when you're working with energy related issues, utility related issues, the at now time frame for an energy service company is a 30-year time block. And consequently, people are thinking out that far. Also, a number of policies, positions, points, rules basically don't have their origin in the last few years with state and federal authority, but they haven't. I remember being involved in projects and things, and thanks, Peggy, because you got that right there. It's interesting that many of the decisions, many of the rules, much of the planning, especially at the federal level with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and PJM, did not start during the Biden administration or even the Obama administration. It started in the first few years of the first Bush administration and the last years of the Reagan administration. People have been thinking out that far. Also, early in my tenure here at the Ohio Farm Bureau, I remember being in conferences in the 1990s where they were talking about and future casting different types of technologies and when this transition basically was going to be taking place. And I need to tell you this, is that in many issues, many energy service providers, their schedule now is much different. They're not on the same schedule that they predicted at the beginning of the century. As a matter of fact, many of them are now ahead of schedule because of technologies and things coming into place. Things are happening at a quicker pace than what was seen. Also, too, in these pictures, I'm going to tell you this. When we're talking about energy transition here during the first couple of decades of this century, we're probably going through the most rapid and most complex changes with regard to energy generation, transmission, and local distribution networks since they were first brought online and installed in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. A number of things are happening. You're seeing in Eastern Ohio, retiring of a number of coal-fired generation facilities. There are very few left, 3 out of every 5 across the United States, especially in the Appalachian Plateau where Ohio is located. They are now decommissioned, retired, and are being torn down in different things. What's replacing them? You're seeing natural gas-fired turbine generation. You're seeing wind, solar, biomass, fuel cell. You're also seeing, and I was involved in a number of things having to do with compact nuclear reactors, where those discussions started about 15 years ago. And we have energy service providers taking a look at that now too. You're also seeing, with regard to transmission, pipeline systems across much of Ohio are being refitted to take a look not only with natural gas transportation, but also hydrogen and other types of gaseous fuels. You're seeing the entire transmission system being refitted. We're in a national interest transmission corridor in this part of PJM, where everything between Pittsburgh and Chicago is being updated, refitted, reconstructed in many particular areas. And also local distribution systems, how electricity basically comes from the substation to a farm, a home, or business is being redone. And so a number of things are happening with regard to energy development. I also need to tell you this, what you learn right now working with one energy service provider, be it in energy generation, which we're talking about today, be it in transmission systems, pipelines, transmission lines, be it in the local distribution system with your incumbent public utility. What you learn working with them is going to serve your community and serve your leadership extremely well when you see the next project coming down the line. And we're seeing that right now, that where some local communities were thinking about, I'm only going to have one project that I need to think about with regard to generation, transmission, distribution systems. Many are now in their second and third project. Also, too, many of these projects are now being organized under a merchant function format. Eminent domain provisions might not apply, which means your ability to be at the table to create stipulations, agreements, negotiate programs, processes, benefits to your community is much better than you think. And I tell folks this, given the opportunity to be at that table to advocate your position as a local government is going to be very important, because I'm also going to tell you this, if you're not at the table advocating your position for your constituents, you will be part of the menu. Let's go to the next slide, Peggy, and that should be utility scale projects 50 megawatts or above. Thank you. Building upon what Eric and what Peggy have said, utility scale projects are 50 megawatts and above. There's one exemption to that particular rule, and it has to do with solar. Because of the size of the technology, there was a law passed about 12 to 13 years ago that solar projects 5 megawatts in capacity or above are considered economically significant wind farms, and they also come under Ohio Power Siting Board jurisdiction with regard to power siting. But when it comes to solar, their jurisdiction starts at 50 megawatts of capacity and above. The Ohio Power Siting Board's process provides a statewide adjudicatory system of rules and regulations applicable to siting, public and private generation, and transportation facilities under its particular authority. Many folks need to understand and appreciate this, and Ohio is kind of unique. We have one uniform authority, process, and system with regard to power siting under their jurisdiction in all 88 counties. It's a judicial process. I tell folks, I want you to think of this almost as a court of law, because many of the things you can do in the court of common pleas, file motions to intervene, the application is a matter of public record, the ability to be a party of record in a case, to negotiate stipulations, agreements, be part of the hearing process, examination, cross-examination, delivering of evidence, witnesses, all are part and parcel of that particular system. And that system was established for all power generation facilities back in 1963. The Ohio Power Siting Board, which is also part of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, coordinates technical, environmental, social, economic, aesthetic evaluations. It provides for decommissioning, bonding, and also conflict resolution procedures for a number of folks that are impacted by that particular project. Also, too, each project in these proceedings is its own separate proceeding, which means your ability to negotiate very key provisions that are unique to your county. And I tell farmers this in their leasing agreements, unique to their farm, you have the right, the ability, and responsibility to advocate those unique needs and have them recognized and have them as part of the negotiation process going forward. The Ohio Power Siting Board is also an umbrella organization, because you're going to find out this, that there is a number of state and federal agencies that have some aspect that will impact power siting. And the Ohio Power Siting Board coordinates interstate transmission interconnection and application of other federal and state permits, which means they also work very closely through this process with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, ODNR Division of Oil and Gas, ODNR Division of Wildlife, Ohio and State EPA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Many people are finding out that when you put a footprint of a power generation facility onto a piece of ground, yes, there are a number of federal regulations with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, known as NERC, and PJM, which governs how that generation facility, regardless of technology, is going to be created. But I also tell people this, outside of the fence, once you put that into a footprint, everything else also needs to be considered. Soil and water conservation, tile, setbacks, aesthetics, taxes do not come under those federal guidelines with FERC, NERC, and PJM. To need to negotiate, evaluate, to have a process for those things in power siting are very important. one of the reasons we have the Ohio Power Siting Board. And yes, I have to concur with both Eric and with Peggy that local governments have a direct right of intervention in OPSB proceedings through SB 52, and even be involved as parties of record to be involved in case proceedings to advocate their position. So that's at utility scale, 50 megawatts and above for solar and many other types of technology. Peggy, next slide, please. Great, thank you. This is on the other end of the spectrum. We have a number of folks who have on-site projects. They could be at a kilowatt level and up to somewhere around 5 megawatts in capacity. We actually have over 10,000 farm, home, and urban, suburban, and rural settings, and small businesses who have invested in on-site solar for their home, farm, and business. One of the reasons we know that is that the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio requires those folks basically to register their project for their renewable energy credits. That is a matter of public record. And in many cases, you can see and take a look with regard to those. And there's usually 35 to 40 of those projects per week or so that enter into that list. When it comes to on-site projects on your side of the meter, kilowatt to 5 megawatt level, those are governed by local utility interconnection procedures. The interconnection goes directly into the incumbent utility, goes directly into the local distribution circuit. I was involved in a number of those particular issues 20 years ago when you took a look at what is now called customer-friendly interconnection. A number of years ago, in the latter part of the last century, if you wanted to do customer interconnection for an on-site system, it cost you about $20,000, $10,000 for a engineering study, and another $10,000 in fees with regard to interconnecting directly into the local distribution circuit. Number of rules, regulations, processes were put into place, and you now have customer-friendly interconnection. That where many folks, once they basically meet the requirements of their incumbent utility, it is relatively easy now to do interconnections with regard to that. Those interconnection procedures are PUCO approved tariffs, procedures that provide parameters for technical design approval that a public utility will use, safety, emergency shutoff, operations, and generation credits. And so all of that is detailed very much into those particular applications. Interconnection for on-site projects is limited to the local distribution circuit under the authority of your local distribution utility, be it an investor-owned utility, a municipal utility, or even a local rural electric cooperative. They all have their procedures basically in place that must be obeyed, looked at, and approved for interconnection. Owners are also encouraged to share their design with local government officials, county and township governments, fire protection folks, their insurance provider, and other service providers to let them know that I am going to be investing in this at my home, farm, and business. These are the procedures in place, and consequently, these are some things that I want to talk with you about so you know what's going on with the process. Again, those are not necessarily mandatory discussions, but we're telling folks this: if you want to be a good neighbor, if you want to make sure that things basically go extremely well, if you want to make sure your local government understands and appreciates what you're doing, continue that conversation, that communication as you're going forward with the project. Also, many local governments have the right to incorporate their own policies and procedures for aesthetics, facility placement, inspection, and decommissioning into local ordinances and community development plans. I did a lot of that work about 20 years ago for UCLA. UCLA is Upper Canton, Lower Akron, where you see many different townships, many different communities along that urban, suburban, rural mix. We've invested in these types of technologies. And many local governments that have their own zoning and planning in place also have provisions in there and guidelines with regard to placement on a rooftop, inspection of interconnection facilities as normal part of their construction permit processes in the area, as well as some other practical things with regard to aesthetics and setbacks from property lines. And so that system has worked in Ohio for the last 20 some years and continues to do so. Let's take a look at my final slide. Let's talk about community projects. And I have to agree with Peggy, and I also have to agree with Eric. You know, Eric did a very good job when he talked about, you know, there's a mixture here of different types of rules, regulations, and process, and they do not always blend with each other. You have some rule, regulation, process, and authorities with regard to interconnection. Others with regard to what does the OPSB do. Also, too, when it comes to the pilot, taxes, and different things, you have certain provisions, certain rights, certain responsibilities. And those three particular areas might or might not mesh or meet together. That's one of the complexities, basically, of the issues here. We're also seeing very recently developing what are called community scale solar projects. This is all part of House Bill 450. These are proposals to create projects in urban, suburban, and rural areas. There's 2,000 megawatts of capacity reserved for these particular types of projects across Ohio. And there's also some special incentives to create these projects in the traditional Appalachian counties recognized in Ohio. This bill was presented in October 2021. The House Utility Committee had 6 to 7 different hearings, and people testified in those particular hearings. However, they did not vote out a bill for general consideration for the entire House. Also, too, this bill has gone through a major revision, depending if it's called an amendment or a substitute. I've seen both particular versions. And the version on the public website with the Ohio General Assembly is the original version. I have not seen it posted yet with regard to that. But again, this was presented in 2021. The House committees have held hearings, but there's been no action taking it to the floor of the House, and nothing has been done in the Senate. So consequently, HB 450 has not been discussed, been up for consideration, up for vote. It's not necessarily law. Do you need to be involved in this process going forward? Probably so. Do you need to advocate your position as a local government official when and if these come up during the lame duck session after the general election or early in next year's General Assembly, where this will probably be discussed again? The answer to those ones is yes. I would also have to say, too, there's a tremendous amount of confusion, issue, and concern going on. Starting in April, I've got calls from county commissioners who were sent letters, or their local constituents and community stakeholders said, you need to support this project that's going on in our county now. And they're saying, what project is that? How is community scale solar with regard to that? A number of things are happening there. I've also seen a tremendous amount of leasing activity with farmers. I do kitchen table meetings with many of our Farm Bureau members. And right now, with no law in place, and you're taking a look at leasing activities for what you would call community solar, we have members in over 45 different counties, as far south and west as Hamilton County itself, and as far north and east as Ashtabula, where members, local farmers, rural residents are being approached by anywhere between 1, 3, and upwards of 6 different leasing agents or land agents about leasing the same piece of property for, quote, a community solar project. Some of these, and some of the size of some of the draft leases I've seen are as little as 10 to 20 acres. The largest one I've seen is upwards of 380 acres in size. Leasing activity is very intense, very much underway. And I'm also getting reports and requests for information from county commissioners and township trustees. Several of these companies have come to township trustee meetings in a number of counties and said, you know, we're doing a project. The substation is in your township. You need to support and approve this particular project now. I have a lot of township trustees saying this, you know, Dale, when I took this job, I know my county does not have any zoning. My county and my township does not necessarily have any zoning with regard to this or planning. When I became a township trustee, I'm not paid. It's almost like I'm a volunteer. I do get a nice health insurance policy through my membership with the Ohio Townships Association as payment. I like that. But I'm in charge of dust and ice control, working with the county engineer on ditch maintenance and culvert replacement, snow removal. I make sure that our park in the township is mowed. Our township cemetery, if we have to open or shut a grave, we basically work on that. The only real contentious issue I've been involved in is a line fence dispute between two adjoining landowners. Now I'm being asked to do a process where I need to approve a project of this size, scope, and complexity. I know what the Ohio Power Siting Board does for things 50 megawatts or above. Do I have to do the same thing here? I'm rather concerned with what I'm hearing from my constituents. I'm rather concerned what I'm hearing from land agents representing a number of companies. I'm rather concerned about some of the provisions I might have to take a look at and put into documentation. Do I have to take a look basically at zoning? Do I have to create also planning documents and things? Do we need to have a policy at the township level on governing our decisions and things going forward in this process? And can you help me do that? Those discussions are very much going forward. Also, too many folks are saying this. What's interesting, and I've talked to a number of attorneys in power generation in Ohio and other places, because these are under 50 megawatts of capacity, they're not under the Ohio Power Siting Board's jurisdiction process. Because they could be they're in that area between 5 and 49.9, customer-friendly interconnection issues might or might not apply with the incumbent utility. And they are concerned also with regard to provider of last resort provisions, with regard to size of these projects. Do they have capacity and local distribution circuits in many areas to be able to do this? Their responsibilities are also rather grave and sometimes could be nebulous on these types of provisions. And they're looking for guidance and creating guidelines too. All we know also is this: many township trustees and county commissioners, and I've been to a number of county commissions under Ohio Sunshine Law to explain this during their sessions, and have a number of others scheduled through September about what is this about? What do we need to do to be involved in? What is power siting authority? Because many folks are identifying local government in this area with regard to that. Are these public utilities? Does the public utility exemption apply? Remember this with community solar, this project basically is to be established in an area. It could be in a transmission circuit or a local distribution circuit, and the service will go to people who subscribe to it. Could this be considered a private facility? Does public utility process, is it involved with regard to this? Right now, many local government officials are saying, you know, this is a 1,000-mile journey, and the roadmap I've been given to get from point A to point B with regard to my responsibilities and involvement in this process is literally a blank sheet of paper. A number of things need to be done. A number of things need to be addressed. We as local government officials need to be involved in the process. Many of our constituents who are looking at leasing and different things long-term have a number of particular questions. Many things are happening. That's the end of my presentation. And if you'd like to talk further and extend this conversation, please give me a call on different things and we will continue that conversation. Peggy, I hope Dan has been able to get back onto the system, but I'll leave it up to us basically to entertain and have any questions from our participants at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Yeah, sorry about that. I got blue screened and it booted me out. So I'm glad everyone's still here. So thank you to all our panelists. I do want to make sure that everyone that was listening in does take an account like the contact, just so that if they have things that come up in the future, these are the people to talk to. These are the people that are going to give you good advice. And right now we're going to open it up for questions. So just go ahead and put your name and county on the chat there, and I'll call you out in order, and you can ask anybody on here any questions you might have.
And Dan, I also added the links that Peggy mentioned in her portion to the chat.
Okay. Okay, I know it was a lot of information. I don't see anything coming up, Gwen. I don't know if I missed anything when I got kicked out, but you know, we'll give it another couple minutes, and if there are no questions, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. And want to thank everyone for joining. Okay. All right, well, it doesn't seem that we have any questions, but again, do take note of the speakers that we had. You might need them in the future for various projects in your counties. Make sure you pass that along to any township trustees. Again, Dale did a great job in talking about their role in this and how it's new, and it can be very overwhelming. But you know, through our partners and Ohio State Extension, you know, we're here to help and guide you through any process that you might have, and give you the best information out there. So with that, I guess I don't see any questions, and thank you all for joining. And next, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the traditional oil and gas program, where we're going to talk about waste management, brine water wells, the public meeting process, and Mark Bruce is going to talk about orphan wells again. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Dan.
Hey, thank you all. You guys did a wonderful job. And again, this is going to be recorded. So thank you for that.
Happy Monday. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.